I'd like to welcome and thank everyone, both here in person and online, for joining our first Telosa Town Hall. My name is John Mallon. I'm the CEO of the Telosa Community Foundation. And Telosa is about leading with people and building community. And together we will shape Telosa. We have a great program in store for you, which we believe you'll enjoy. And we're going to start with an exciting Telosa video. Thank you.
At Telosa, we're on a mission to create a more equitable and sustainable future. By starting with a clean slate, we have this really unique opportunity to focus on what's most important: culture, values, and really putting people at the center. We're not just building a new city. This is a new model for society. That level of ambition requires pioneers, people ready to push the boundaries of what we know today. And I strongly believe our community and our team co-designing this together will make this vision a reality.
Telosa is founded on inclusivity, openness, and fairness. In present society, there's a lot of gaps that exist, and we can no longer take a back seat to it. We can't be complicit. We have to be about action.
Something of this magnitude, I think, is going to require folks come in with innovative thoughts, disruptive thinking. And if we can actually combine the best of American cities and the dynamism and create more opportunity where it's fair, then that's the holy grail. So the foundation of Telosa, the economic model, is something called equitism.
The idea behind the land value has proven to be very successful in many parts of the United States as well as countries around the world. The land will be owned by the foundation. What this means is that when the community grows and land values will increase, the foundation will then take those resources and reinvest them back into enhanced services that benefit the community, such as world-class education, housing, healthcare, jobs retraining. Everyone has a stake, and no one is left behind.
No matter where we build Telosa, we will always have two aspects in mind: the environment and the people. We will create a 15-minute city that promotes active and sustainable modes of transportation, mixed-use districts that ensure all daily needs are within a 5-minute walk from your house. In Telosa, you will always feel connected to nature. Think of Manhattan, where you have Central Park. In Telosa, you will have a green space that weaves throughout the city as a central spine. That will be available to more residents that will have frontage to the park.
I think the most exciting thing is that clean slate. The ability to create something new and sustainable and learn from the mistakes of the past. So for example, when it comes to energy, we're going to create efficient buildings. We're going to have a diverse source of renewable energy supply to generate more energy than we consume. The same thing with water, generating enough water to supply the future of Telosa and potentially even other communities through efficiency, recycling, and technology.
Telosa's bringing in all generations and even the younger generation to help in the planning, to actually have ideas and help create the city in a way that makes sense for everybody.
It's great to have these sort of technological innovations, but if there's no real soul of the city, it doesn't really ring true for the people. And I think that having its own unique culture with art, music, fun things to do is gonna be what brings the city to life.
People are the essence of the city, which bring the city alive with vibrancy.
Telosa is the unique opportunity to create a blueprint for how we live, work, and interact with each other. And all the research and learnings that come along the journey will be shared to benefit people in existing cities and to create a template for future cities.
We'll start with 50,000 people, a really diverse group, and from that seed, grow into this incredible city of 5 million people.
Telosa will be the city that loves you, actively listens to you. Doesn't matter who you are. We want to see you. We want for you to experience Telosa, for you to be a part of it.
Hello, hello, hello. There's nothing quite like walking out to silence, so thank you for the support. And thank you for sitting through the technical difficulties. We're all a little out of practice, I think, for in-person events, but we really appreciate you all being here. Did you guys like the video? It's really good, very impressive. So thank you to Squint Opera for putting that together. I'm feeling inspired. You got a little glimpse of what Telosa and our future is going to look like. So thank you all to the community for being here. We appreciate your support in person, and also to those who are tuning in via live stream. Looking at you right now, straight into the camera. So I'm Nora Ali. I'm a media entrepreneur and host of Business Casual from Morning Brew. So let's dive into why we're here. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, bear with me. So Telosa, as I'm sure you're all aware, is being built from a clean slate with ideas from the community at its heart. One big goal is to create a transparent and participatory government where residents are more involved in decision making. So the point of this town hall is to share feedback that we've gotten from the community so far, and to give you more insight into the progress that we've made thus far, and also to learn from you. So we received questions from the community prior to this session, and we were very intentional in picking topics that addressed those questions that you all had. But most importantly, we hope you will stay for the reception. It is a cocktail reception afterwards, and that might be a really great way for you all to meet with the panelists, get other questions answered that you felt weren't answered during the session itself. So we have a lot of thank yous, and I will save most of them for the end. But first and foremost, a thank you to Polco, which is a leading community engagement firm. The comments that you saw scrolling as you guys were getting seated came from a survey we conducted with over 1,000 respondents. We'll be highlighting some of those findings from the survey during this discussion, and you can see full results at Telosa's website, which is cityoftolosa.com. And of course, we'll share more ways for you to collaborate with us at the end of this town hall. Okay, thank you to the community. I'm being told that I need to thank the community over and over because you are so important to us. So thank you, community. It's a word we're going to be using a lot during this session. Okay, time for the panelists. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. First and foremost, we have Mark Laurie. You know him, you love him. He's a serial entrepreneur and chairman of the Telosa Community Foundation. Netta Jenkins, hello, my friend. She's a global DEI expert. She's a Telosa Junto member. The Junto group is the behind-the-scenes team that is making Telosa happen around the country, around the world even. Preet Barara, hello, Preet. He is also a Telosa Junto member. Your description is very long. You're a lawyer, author, podcaster, former assistant U.S. attorney, and U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, and I think most importantly, a longtime friend of Mark's. I think over 40 years, something like that.
Yes.
And we have Alana Goldwhite at the end there. She is an associate at BIG, which is Bjarke Ingels Group, a global premier architecture firm, and she is Telosa's lead architect. Amazing, amazing. Okay, now you know who everyone is. Let's get to it. Mark, of course, the first couple questions will be for you. The big one is, why a city from scratch? And I know it's not just about the city. There's a lot behind this.
That's right. It didn't start as, hey, we wanted to build a city from scratch. It really was wanting to, prove a new model for society, or at least test one. I think we've all watched America, grow more divided than ever. Income and wealth inequality the gap continues to grow. Access to education is limited for many people. So there's definitely some serious problems that we're dealing with. So despite capitalism and all its strengths and the great material progress we've made, it's not perfect. And so we thought about, is there another way? And people have been discussing this, and there are other countries that have attempted to solve the problem in different ways. You take Denmark and Sweden, for example, who have decided to jack up tax rates and invest that into social services, and they have some of the best social services in the world, so that's one model. We believe that we found an alternative path that we'd like to test, that we're calling equitism, that allows us to offer these incredible social services without having to increase taxes. And I think that is the holy grail, as Vinny mentioned in the video, and that's really what we're out to test here.
And you're trying in many ways to set Telosa apart from how other cities have attempted this. And I know you were inspired by Progress and Poverty by Henry George. Can you explain how that helped to inform your mission, vision, and values for Telosa?
Yeah, that's when it really clicked. So there's a book called Progress and Poverty by Henry George, late 19th century economist. Apparently, this was the second most read book next to the Bible back in the day, which is hard to believe because it's very hard to get through, but basically proved that the problem with capitalism is land ownership, that everything else is actually works really well, but not land ownership. And if you think about it, like capitalism definitely had some flaws early on, and we're able to plug those holes. For example, monopolies don't work well in a capitalistic system. That's why we have antitrust laws and we ensure fair competition. We plug that with laws. But land ownership was one of these areas where there's a finite amount of land, and people basically, had a stake in the ground and said, this is my land, and they own that land, and how that land was distributed back in the day was not only not fair, but it's not fair to future generations that don't have that same access. And landowners are able to extract extraordinary value and cause us to have a lot of the problems that we have with capitalism. And so the idea, after reading the book, was what if the land, day one, were owned by the foundation, by the people, if the people actually had a stake in the land. And it really only works if the land doesn't have value. And so the Telosa project is going to go out and find land that's virtually worthless, hundreds of thousands of acres of land. The land will be owned by the Telosa Community Foundation. And if we can build a city of 5 million people, that land will be worth, call it $500 trillion. And then Telosa Foundation would sell off the land once the step change in the value of the land has increased, take those dollars from selling the land, create an endowment, like a university endowment, and basically take the income on that endowment every year and reinvest it back in social services. And the way we've calculated it, we could have the most incredible education system, medical benefits, affordable housing, jobs training, all funded through this endowment. And if it works well and people trust it, and if they really trust it, maybe people will want to contribute to it even more and donate to the endowment. So the endowment, the way university endowments grow and can do more for the university, this would be the same thing. We'd be able to do more for the city for each of the following generations.
So what you're describing is what you all are calling equitism. And I'm going to ask you a question that investors often ask founders, and that is, why you, Mark? Specifically, what about your upbringing has informed your approach to Telosa?
Well, one is the entrepreneurial path of the project itself, and this is not about me. It's I'm trying to help bring people together, like these amazing people on the panel here, and just get together a really inclusive, diverse group of people that together are going to figure this out and sort of create this model together. So it's not about me or as an entrepreneur, but I definitely can help. Having built things from nothing into large companies, that sort of thinking, I guess, is applicable here. But in terms of what I'm really passionate about and why I'm, is that I do think that education is the key. And I grew up in Staten Island, New York, until I was in 5th grade. Parents had me very young. Didn't have money. Grew up in an apartment and then a duplex, and was in a predominantly Catholic, Irish, Italian neighborhood. Wasn't diverse at all in terms of thinking, knowledge. Didn't really know anything, and then was very, very fortunate to have moved to New Jersey and have gone to a very small, diverse school along with Preet and Vinny. 30 kids in the graduating class. It was extremely diverse. And just very fortunate, great education, and I really would attribute the complete change in trajectory in what would have been my life had I not gone there, versus having gone there and having the ability to be around smart people in a really diverse group and really learn so much, and then eventually be able to get into college, be the first one in my family to go to college, and then become what has happened in my life, which is the true American dream. But I'm so fortunate and lucky, and not everyone has that access or the ability to get into those types of educational programs, and really thought, like, how do we do it? How do we invest more in education so that everybody has equal opportunity and equal access to that, so that everyone has the chance to pursue the American dream?
It all comes down to access. And Mark, you said it's not about you, which I think is important to point out. So I'm going to move off of you for a second and go over to Alana. Alana, you have one of the coolest jobs I've ever seen in my life. Can you explain how big has been involved and critical to the building of Telosa?
Sure. A little bit of context. BIG, we are a group of designers, architects, urban planners. We're based here in Brooklyn, but also in Copenhagen, London, and Barcelona. So I think one of the things that drew Mark to us was that global portfolio of work and that diversity that we would bring to the team. I'm trying to click, but it's not.
Can we get the
clicking.
slides queued up, please?
I would love to show you all. We actually mapped the team where everyone was from, and we realized that we're from over 30 countries.
The more you click, the more it'll work.
The more it'll work.
We'll get them up.
Yeah, we'll get there. We're from over 30 countries all around the world, and we definitely brought a portfolio of work, but also an understanding of the world around us. So I think, Mark, one of our first sessions, oh, wow, amazing, okay.
Nice.
Let me flip back.
There it
so,
is.
Here we are, one team, 40 professionals, 18 countries, ranging from people just out of grad school to people with decades of experience. When Mark walked in our door, he mentioned to us, I want a city that's the best, as great as New York, as great as Tokyo in terms of its innovation and its efficiency, as great as, at first he said Stockholm in terms of social services, which we agreed with, but I think, you know, by the second meeting, Mark was like, let's change it to Copenhagen. So we kind of, our Danish blood convinced him that Copenhagen had many benefits that we could learn from. And what the team did is we created an urban atlas of all of these different cities, marking the best of from all around the world. And with that in mind, we were able to create these goals for the city about reducing the amount of water we're using, eliminating all fuel-based cars and instead going autonomous and electric, creating a city where PV panels produce energy for the entire city. So really ambitious goals that we know are realistic because we've seen other cities do them. What's really special about Telosa is we're bringing all of those cities and all of that low-tech and high-tech technology together to create a city that's really never been created before. So I'm showing you guys on the screen a few different goals that we had in mind in terms of water reduction, how 100% renewable energy would generate for the city from the rooftops, and even about how much food we're growing. And because of these goals, Telosa started to look really different. And that's what we love about design. Design should look a certain way because it's performative. When you're in Telosa, this is actually a few members of our team standing on a rooftop and looking out from the outskirts of the city. And when you're in the outskirts of the city, all you would read is wind turbines and PV panels and greenhouses because you're growing all the food and you're producing all the energy right on site.
Amazing.
I just add
Go
one
ahead.
thing. Just, when we started out, the mission was really about creating a more equitable future. That was the mission. And as we started to realize that the best way to prove this was to build a city, we thought, well, since we're building a city from scratch, we also have the opportunity to solve one of the other very big problems we have facing our society, which is sustainability. And so our mission then evolved to be, creating a more equitable and sustainable future. And I think that's really what we're focused on right now.
And one thing that is tied to what Alana was talking about is something that's important to the community as well. In fact, overall quality of the natural environment, that's air, water, green space, was rated as the #2 most important issue by respondents. In fact, 93% rated it as essential or very important. So Alana, you pointed to the sustainability piece of it. If you could talk to a little bit more about maybe some of the natural environment green spaces as well and how you think about that balancing the maybe more urban, more dense urban areas.
Sure. I mean, I think when you're in a city like New York, everyone wants to be around Central Park, right? That's the place to be. I mean, Central Park is the major park, but any other smaller park as well. In Telosa, we took that park and we wove it throughout the city. So more people, as I said in the video that you just heard, would have frontage to that green space. Green space and people being able to escape the density of urban life and be a part of nature is really key to making people within Telosa feel like they're in a whole new place.
And Preet, I have a specific question for you from a community member from Tulsa, Oklahoma. This question is, I love Telosa's vision, but there are many struggling cities around the country and world. As Telosa's vision becomes a reality, is there any way to simultaneously help lift other cities up as well? And you're someone who is intimately familiar with the shortcomings of our current systems and existing cities. So what is your take on doing this from scratch?
Well, so thanks for the question. I'd like to start by just saying what I think is apparent from the video and from the conversations for people who have been involved in or have heard about Telosa for some period of time and people who may be showing up for the first time And it ties into the question you asked and the answer that I'll give, and that is, vision is important. And it takes bold thought and creativity and outsized ambition to do something special. And I think that's what this is. I'm a born skeptic. My job as a lawyer requires me to be skeptical. And sometimes people in my profession, will tell you, no, you can't do that thing because it's too difficult, it's too hard. Mark is not a lawyer. Doesn't feel those limitations, and look what it's done for his career and for the companies that he started. Once upon a time, Mark's vision, as we mentioned, I went to school with Mark, as did my brother. They were in the same class. Mark's vision was, how his friends could come over in high school and break into the parents' liquor cabinet. And so I think that's where it began, in part. It's a very special thing to think big, and one could make the argument, and maybe even sort of complaint, that if you have a lot of ability and resources and convening power, the way you should spend that capital is to help fix the cities that already are falling apart and are not great, as you mentioned. Sure, that's one way of going about it. There are people who are doing that. There are people who are focused on that. There are charities that do that. I think you also need people to think about the moonshot or the Mars shot or something that has not been tried before. And in the process of, I think already, by talking about the ways in which you've thought about green frontage and you've thought about income inequality and the things that you're going to talk about in a moment, that whether the project is ultimately wildly successful or not, and I think it will be, along the way you learn things, just like you do through space exploration and other exploration in the past number of centuries that we've been recording history. You will learn about sustainability. You will learn about how to fight corruption in cities. You will learn about better policing practices. You will learn about better ways to help the environment, or at least not harm the environment. So every bit of this, as we talk about it, is about the city of Telosa, but along the way, it's about educating mayors and city council members and other and environmentalists and activists and others in their own cities how to do things better.
Mark, do you have a take on how this will help to uplift other cities as you're going through the process of building Telosa?
I do. I think, like Preet said, we're starting with a clean slate, so we're able to do things. We're not encumbered by the legacy systems or processes of existing cities. So technology has moved very far, and so there's incredible things we can do to utilize technology to build a more efficient, sustainable city. And then I also think from a values mission standpoint, cities didn't really start with a clear mission and a set of values and really put people at the center consciously. It sort of just happened organically. And I think we're testing this, what if, people in the city had real pride in the city in which they live because they believe in the values and what the city stands for. Our values about being the most open, the most inclusive, the most fair city in the world, and having people that really want to live those values and are attracted to the city because of those values and because of the mission statement. And to build a city the way you would build a startup. Startups have typically better cultures than existing legacy, long-standing corporations for that reason, that you're able to bring and start fresh from the beginning. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when we do that, because we've never really done that before. And I think that can really give the city soul, which is one of the biggest issues with building a new city from scratch.
And it's not like there's an exit plan for Telosa. It's not like you're done. Here's the learnings, everyone. It's through the process of building Telosa. You'll share with city leaders and regional leaders and help them understand what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah,
for
we
you.
want to build a blueprint, ideally, if it all works. But there'll be, like as Preet said, we're going to learn a lot of things along the way, and people will learn from those failures. But overall, I think there'll be a lot of things that do work and great lessons to learn.
Telosa's not going public.
Even something like, No.
Sorry, I interrupted you with my one joke. So Netta, hello. Thank you for your patience. I know you have a lot of fire stuff to say, so it's your turn. So in our Polko survey, we found that a lot of community members were unhappy with their city's ability to support diversity, income equality, and general community affordability. You've done this. You've helped on the inclusion and diversity and equity front for companies, for big organizations. What are some of the learnings that you can apply to a city and doing it from scratch? What's your take on it?
Yeah, there's always a three-step process that I like to follow. And the first piece is really actively listening. So my background's in communication and behavioral psychology. One of the hardest things for us to do as human beings is actually actively listen, right? And that is a key part, because if we actively listen, then we're able to believe, right, in people's stories and the data that we're receiving as well, and even some of those disparities that we may be seeing that may exist. And the final step is, once we then believe, we're then able to implement. And so that is kind of the process that I like to follow within the workplace, and the same type of process that I would want to follow on this project as well.
Now, to staying with you, Telosa's values are to be open, fair, and inclusive. The word inclusive could mean many different things, and you're the expert here. So what does inclusion mean to you?
Oh my goodness, I love this question. So inclusion is having the ability to identify the power in which we hold, right? And then once we've identified the power in which we hold, then we share that power with others around us. So a small example of that is, recently I took my daughter to the playground, struck up a conversation with another mother there, and her daughter is biracial. So her daughter identifies as white and black, and she had coarse curly hair. But one of the things that she was saying was, hey, my daughter's hair is very matted. I don't know how to detangle it. I've used all of these various products, and still she has camp tomorrow. What do I do, right? This is my first time meeting her. In that very moment, so that's the thing about inclusion, we have to continuously identify that power, right? In that very moment, I knew that, hey, I have products. I have a daughter that has the same textured hair. I can actually help her in that very moment. I invited her back to my house. I'm not saying everyone should start opening their doors, right? Invited her back to my house and did her daughter's hair. I detangled it. I was able to then show her the products that she could use for her daughter's hair. So that is what, inclusion is. I think to kind of take it a step further, when we start to think about venture capital, right? Women receive 2.2% in venture capital. Black women receive 0.2%. Right? Hispanic, Latinx, Asian, 0.1%, Indigenous, even less than that. So you would then think someone that may have acquired a level of wealth can say, okay, well, I have a level of power here, and here is how I can share it with others. I can identify these demographics and give back in that way, specifically and very intentionally.
And I think the Junto team, the Telosa team, is very intentional about the power that we all hold, and trying to make it inclusive from day one, and that is reflected by the team that Mark, you put together. So Preet, a little lightning round of questions for you. So with the goal of creating a more inclusive, open, and fair city, what parts of our existing law enforcement and judicial system would you institute in a new city and community? What would you keep? What's working? What's good?
How much time do I got? So I know you're going to ask this question. It's hard. There are a lot of things that are not working in New York and other places. I'll talk about a couple of things just very quickly, because, as you said, lightning round. One, we have to do a better job on policing in our cities in the country, in New York and elsewhere. And maybe you'll come to this in a moment, I think you may, that one of the results of the poll was that people really care in their cities about public safety. They care about, justice, and they care about equality. But at the same time, they care about public safety. You're hearing that kind of discussion among people in New York City, in the various boroughs, and in other cities as well. And I think Telosa, in order to fulfill the promise that Mark and others have, needs to be safe. It needs to prove itself that it can be safe, while at the same time making sure that it is keeping the public safe in fair and equitable and appropriate ways. So I think one of the things you would focus on, just like you're focusing on the environment and on sustainability and all sorts of other things, is you look and see what around the country has worked best, because you are starting from scratch. And you don't have to have a police department that has been marred by scandal and excessive use of force and all sorts of bad things over 2 centuries. You don't have to have a local prison system like Rikers Island that I tried to help fix, didn't work out so well, and it remains broken. You can start by looking at examples of other cities that have done a good job. Camden, New Jersey, for example, that was once a terrible place for public safety, transformed itself in many ways. So you look at those things. I think the second thing that you'd want to do is think about how you choose your elected officials. And I have some experience in looking at and holding accountable public officials who didn't uphold their oath and their loyalty to the Constitution and to the laws of the state and the country. And among those things, and New York does some of them, you want to think about having, elections that are not based on party. You want to think about ranked choice voting. You want to think about who really runs the city. Do you want to have a city manager type person who is nonpartisan? Do you want to have a traditionally partisan election? Do you want to have term limits? Do you want to have some balance between the power and authority of a mayor of the city of Telosa versus a city council? How do you want to go about those things? What is the fundraising mechanism? And my view is that fundraising in most places, the way elections are financed in most places in the country, and in localities as well, is broken, relies mostly on private money, which causes people to have doubt about the integrity of their leaders, and causes people to wonder about whether or not they're doing things because it's the right thing to do for the city, or is it the right thing to do for certain donors. And sometimes it's the case that they do things for donors rather than for their city. So I think two of many, many things relating to your question are how we police in a way that's effective but also fair and equitable, and how we elect folks so that they don't rob the city blind.
I think the question of accountability is especially important for Telosa because you're building it with the people at its core, first and foremost. Do you have any advice on how community members, ultimately who live in Telosa, can hold their leaders accountable when it's so difficult, it seems, in existing cities?
Yeah, so I don't have a specific answer. This is something that we'll be looking at, like everything else, over the coming years. But I think the most important thing is that you invest in the people a certain authority to hold their leaders accountable. Now, we have a range of provisions in the country in different states about how you can pull a candidate back and pull an official back. Some of them are too permissive. Some of them are not permissive enough. You want to think about having shorter terms, perhaps. I think there are a lot of different things to look at. What's important, though, this is not something you can do with laws, and this is true in a lot of different areas. Culture matters, right? It's not a law that's going to cause citizens to care and citizens to vote. I don't think Telosa is going to have a law that mandates voting, but certain cities have more engagement, certain countries have more engagement, because the people feel, and hopefully this is something that's already accomplished by the vision that Mark has, equitism and people's feeling of investment in their community. If people feel like their vote matters, they vote. If people feel like they have an ability to hold the people who they elect accountable, those officials will behave better. So as much as you can have a feedback loop of engagement and accountability and participation and pride in the city, all of that, even though it's a softer thing than codifying laws, is very important too.
This notion of pride in the city is something, Mark, I've heard you talk about a lot. How important is it for residents to really feel proud of the community, to give back, and ultimately benefit from the appreciation of the land in Telosa?
Yeah, I think this idea that people basically have a stake in the success of the city and have more trust in the endowment and the foundation to do good will inspire them hopefully to do good and have pride in the city and really, encourage others to do good as well. And that's really the hope and the dream here.
And you want the residents to feel like they are seen and heard and they're not throwing out suggestions into an empty void. So Netta, given how divided our country is right now, what is your advice on how we sort of create a foundation of openness and ensure that we are creating a community that fosters the free exchange of ideas while also making sure people feel psychologically and physically safe?
Yeah, I want to hone in on the free exchange of ideas, right? Because I think oftentimes when we think free exchange of ideas, we don't add the element of inclusion to it. So it goes back to how do we identify that power, right? And then how do we then share it with others around us? And so it's definitely going to be very critical that we really start off with the educational component, right? Really being able to educate each other, but also being able to take action on those things as well. And I think community engagement is going to be critical, right? We actually have the ability to co-create. So like Mark was saying, it's not just about us, It's about all of you in the audience right now. It's about all of you that are tuned in virtually, those that haven't even heard about Telosa yet, right? So really giving folks the opportunity to engage with each other, learn from each other, but have a level of accountability there as well, that then allows that free exchange of ideas, and also think, hey, is this idea only going to personally impact me, or is it going to also impact those around me?
And we're certainly trying to listen to the community from day one. And one thing that the community said is of utmost importance, in fact, the number one most important thing is safety, which Preet alluded to. So Alana, because that safety is the number one area of focus for the community in terms of livability, how can thoughtful design make a city feel more safe?
I would say as designers, we're limited in what we can do, but we're also really powerful in what we can do. And that is create really dense communities that are multi-use. So for Telosa, we created 36 districts. And these districts are all, gonna have the same problem again, so I'll just wait, okay. These districts are all 15-minute cities. So what that means is wherever you live, for you to get to your daily needs, it just takes a 15-minute walk or even a faster bike ride. In doing that, we're then able to layer our uses, the offices, the living spaces, the amenities are all within just a few minutes of your home. So at night, when the offices are shut down, the residences are alive, and vice versa. So this way people can really move about the city and feel like there's always life and there's always this level of safety. Here you see the first phase of Telosa, and I love how Mark explains it. It reminds me of college moving day when the first 50,000 people walk up to their dorms and all come in at once. And that's the dream of Telosa. Mark, am I explaining that right? I'm summarizing. Then just a couple of years later, the city would really start to exponentially increase and grow until it gets to its final state at 150,000 acres for 5 million people. So the goals are really ambitious, but the module that we're working with is really important and creates that safe environment.
Thank you. And there's things we can do with a clean slate that it's very hard to do in an existing city, like for example, fully autonomous vehicles and transportation. Allows you to create a much safer environment for pedestrians and for automobile accidents and things like that. It's also a lot cheaper. You don't need street lights and street signs. The roads can be a lot more narrow, so there's a lot more walkability. You could biking lanes and things. There's advantages that technology affords us today that it's just too hard to implement in an existing city, because the real hard part about autonomous vehicles is combining driving cars with autonomous vehicles. If you were to build a city that's fully autonomous, it's actually very easy, and we can do it with not a lot of effort or investment. It's very straightforward. So that's one of the things that you can experiment with there.
Can I say one thing, because I just thought of it? Because we're talking generally about the advantages of starting from scratch. I'll give you one very, very concrete example, and it's one that I encountered when I was U.S. Attorney. And people think the U.S. Attorney only prosecutes criminal cases. We also bring civil suits and civil rights cases. And among the category of cases we brought were under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the act from 1990 or 1991, in which there's supposed to be a certain amount of access to people with disabilities in restaurants and theaters. And you can imagine that a city that existed for a long time, it's hard to comply. And the law actually allowed a lot of public facilities and private restaurants not to comply. If you notice, you go into a New York restaurant, often you take a step down, or the restroom is a flight up. And if you're in a wheelchair or you have problems with mobility, you can't eat there, because you've had decades and decades of restaurant building and hotel building and stadium building and everything else. You start from scratch. From day one, Telosa will be accessible to everyone who wants to access the public facility. That's a small thing, but it's not a small thing for the people who have that issue.
Yeah, and we'll get more into that point of accessibility, walkability, mobility with Alana in just a minute. But Netta, I want to get a little transparent here, because we're all about transparency. The demographics of the people who responded to our Telosa survey were 68% white, 63% male, and 77% between the ages of 35 to 54. We understand that's less than ideal, and the team is working very hard to address that from the beginning and ensure that people who are giving feedback and the people who ultimately live at Telosa are representative and we're being inclusive. So what is your advice, again, your guidance on how you can ensure that we are hearing from diverse voices and not just the people who will organically come across Telosa because they're a tech bro, for lack of a better word?
Yes, absolutely. I want to just kind of offer some context. Historically, there have been a demographic and population of people that have been excluded, right? And so that means it's going to take more intentionality, more time to really build those relationships, trust, and respect. And so it's us really doing that work and diving in and not scaring away from it, right? I think that's going to be definitely a key role in that. And even here today, we were very intentional about ensuring that we were reaching out even to various publications with various demographics, whether it be from an accessibility perspective, from a race perspective as well, gender, age, right? So all of those things are key elements, but I think a key role in that is for us to really stick in the game and know that we're gonna have to be intentional about building those relationships in order for us to see more representation and people feeling comfortable to do that.
And speaking of a varied group of people from which to get guidance and feedback, the kids, Mark. It's not us necessarily who are going to be living in Telosa. It's future generations. It's younger children who will grow up and decide that Telosa is the coolest place to live. Are you considering young children's feedback in building this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can learn a lot from the younger generations for sure. They're smart, curious, and willing to take risk, and don't have those same legacy issues that we have in our thinking. It's sort of a clean slate in the way they think about the future, and usually comes from a perspective of being optimistic and what's possible. And I think we need more of that and that level of thinking. And so we've got a group of young folks that are going to be involved in helping to think about and plan Telosa too. So we're excited about that.
So fun. We saw some of the junior advisors in the video as well, so it's nice to see that. So Alana, going back to walkability, mobility, that was one of the things that was very valued by Telosa community members, was proximity to nature and walkability. So talk to us about how the design is going to make Telosa super walkable and the mobility behind it.
Sure. To start, I want to touch upon just the larger city and how the destinations are laid out throughout the city. Today you'll have a downtown and people will really be drawn to that downtown. In Telosa, the downtown is distributed. So you see a stadium, the Laurie Institute, the Equitism Tower, the Innovation Museum. They're all spread out along the central spine and the park so that people are really encouraged to move around. And then when it comes to walkability, I think Mark and Preet, you already started to capture a lot of the important points here. And I agree, it's not until it's personal for you that you realize how hard it is in cities today to move around. My grandma started using a cane and then she ended up in a wheelchair, and it was impossible to get into restrooms and into retail spaces. In Telosa, there are no curbs. So for people to move around, there's no parking spots even, which is one of the really unusual and amazing things of using autonomous cars throughout the city. When cars want to park, they'll actually pull into this automated pod for parking, and they will be parked underground and out of sight. So it's really starting to declutter the city and use design to create really refreshing and inviting spaces. The corridors range in scale from fast speed SkyTran corridors to really small, tight spaces where the cars, nature, and people are all sharing the road. Here, I threw this in because I couldn't, Mark, we got very excited. Like, we were talking about autonomous cars, and then we were like, we should make our own. So we did, and we called it, which, it happens, we called it the ground to air. It is developing this pod, which is a shared capsule that can plug into a car pet and become an autonomous car, or plug into a rotor and become an autonomous helicopter. So,
or go underground and be a hyperloop,
correct.
right?
Yes, yes. it can really do it all. I mean, we were looking at all these different technologies and we said, why has no one just put all of these together? So now that I've talked about this publicly, Mark, we really have the pressure to move forward with this, so we'll talk about that later. But when you see the city and you see what the streetscape is like, I mean, you can just imagine what it would be like to see a car pet just whizzing by you and an eVTOL in the sky. This is a view during the daytime, and you can see how at night it's as alive and active and vibrant as it is during the day.
It's so beautiful and very futuristic looking. And this is actually a question, Preet, that you asked Mark on your podcast is, how do you ensure, Mark, that there's a soul to the city, that it feels culture first, that it doesn't just feel like a stale blueprint of something that the creators of the Jetsons came up with?
Yeah, I think that's a big risk, and other cities have tried that and it hasn't worked out well. I think it starts with people at the center, as we said before, and having a real mission and a set of values and a vision so that when people move to the city, they feel part of something bigger. I think that is the key to really give it soul. I think the design will certainly help. But I think it comes down to the people. And I think, we have a problem, this chicken and egg problem, where how do you get people to move to the city and how do you give it soul? Do you want to move there and be the first person or the 10th person or the 100th person? And so what we decided is that we're going to, like you said about a university move-in, is, build a diverse sort of class of 50,000 people across different age groups and race, religion, and age brackets and income levels, and sort of seed the city with 50,000 people. So day one, it's a vibrant, diverse city, and then you have to just let it go organically from there. So it's not a controlled city, it's not closed, it's meant to be fully open. But in order to seed it and ensure that it's got the best chance of being what it can be, we think it's important to do that. Now, how we do that is very challenging, and that's why we're going to be leaning on a very diverse group of people to think that through, because we can't get that wrong.
Yeah, it's important to admit that we do not have the solutions at this point. That's why we have these sorts of discussions. And Mark, the one thing that people do ask time and time again is, where is Telosa going to be? Do you have any updates? What's the timeline for picking location? What can you tell us on the location?
Yeah, so we're on the lookout right now. We've narrowed it down to basically 3 states and starting to look at parcels of land and things. But the goal is still what we said before, which is try to get 50,000 people by 2030 living in the city of Telosa. And it's ambitious, but we feel it's possible. So let's go for it.
It's not that far away.
You're not going to say which states?
Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. Yeah.
Thank you, Preet.
I was curious.
He's the expert. He's the expert follow-upper. And Mark will answer anything Preet asks, right, Preet? So in addition to the livability, walkability, the sustainability, accessibility, all of that, you also got to work in the city of Telosa. There will be jobs in the city of Telosa, of course. Netta, you did an excellent TED Talk recently about the future of the workplace. What are some of the aspects of the future of work, as you envision it, that you want to see in the city of Telosa?
Yeah, I'd say a multicultural workplace, one that you get to see representation at the top, at the executive level, also baked in with accountability. I know that there are a lot of organizations right now that are saying, hey, DEI efforts are now tied to performance, right? Evaluations, but I always ask the question of, well, how do you actually measure that, right? So being able to actually measure that within an application is critical, and ensuring that all employees are working on, or they have a DEI goal that they know about from the onboarding stage, I think is a critical component. And I think, the last piece of that really, again, is the accountability. I can't stress that enough. Really making sure that there are consequences, right? when there is a lack of representation, and ensuring that people have access to do their work and feel like they can psychologically exist safely.
And from work to school, Mark, do you have any thoughts on what kinds of schooling options will exist, and how did your own educational journey inform your thinking around it?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that I always felt was extremely unfair, that the wealthier areas, towns, got access to better public education. That doesn't seem fair. It seems like everyone should have equal access to incredible education. And that's one of the first things we're going to do from this endowment and the wealth generated from the appreciation of the land, is to invest it so that we have the most incredible public education system that is accessible to everybody in Telosa. And I think that's really important. I think that is the foundational pillar that is the differentiator in whether or not someone has an opportunity to live the American dream and be successful.
So Preet, as we said up top, you have known Mark for the longest, and Mark takes risks. He has the biggest dreams of anyone I've ever seen. He did say it's not about him, but he had the initial idea. I know you guys have been chatting about it as friends for, 5-6 years now. Do you think this is doable? Do you think Telosa is going to come to life? Be honest, please.
Yeah, look, so Mark and I had this, so I got fired a few years ago, and I had time in my hands, and I flew back and forth to the West Coast with Mark, and we talked. He's like, I'm really busy. I can talk to you on a flight. And we flew 6 hours out there, and a couple days, 6 hours back. So we spent 12 hours talking about Telosa, and it wasn't called Telosa, right? He didn't have this team. He had this, germ of an idea. But the amazing thing about generally speaking, it takes two things to be successful. I think most people will tell you this. Vision alone is nothing, and execution without vision is also nothing, right? So Mark had this grand, ambitious idea that I think he'd been thinking about not much longer than 5 years ago. I don't know when you started thinking about it, but it was early stage, right? And look how far we went in an auditorium combined with the live audience and the online audience, hundreds and hundreds of people. He's engaged a team of folks. There's a board. We have pods that are being developed that I didn't even know about. This is new to me. And if you look at the trajectory, yeah, I think it's doable. Just like lots of other things that seem, out of the realm of possibility are possible if you have a driving force behind it. Not just resources, which Mark has, and the ability to convene resources, which Mark now has, through, by the way, dint of hard work and dedication and personal excellence. It wasn't handed to him in any way. And, Mark has done a lot of different things and started companies, some with my brother, some not, and sold them. But I know from talking to him, and I think this is important for people, that this is not a short-term thing for Mark, which is another reason why I think it'll ultimately be successful. This is the thing that animates him more, ultimately, than anything else. He has 9 other things that he's doing at the same, but this thing that will not bear immediate fruit, which is, by the way, the opposite of what we are in America, right? Everything has to be immediate gratification. You joked about SPACs. You start something, you put out a coin, and you have a lot of people buy it, and if it goes, to garbage, who cares? This is a thing that he's prepared to spend the rest of his life building. And if you don't live to be 120, you've now infected a number of other people with the bug, in a good way, to want to carry through the possibility, and you have team members who are dedicated to it. So look, is it difficult? Is it hard? Maybe. I'll quote Mark on the podcast and in real life, who said, if there's, tell me if I got this right, because I think about it. If there's something that is really, really great and transformative you can do for humankind, but the likelihood of success is only 15%, 20%, what number you can answer, then you got to do it if you have the ability and the wherewithal to do it. And very few people in the world have that wherewithal. And the fact that Mark is spending so much time doing that thing is a reason why I feel optimistic about it. Am I right about the 20%?
Yeah, absolutely. I think entrepreneurs think in that language. It's low probability success with huge outcome and upside. And that's really what this is about. It's if you're going into something thinking it has to have an 80, 90% chance of working to dedicate your entire life to it, then this wouldn't be for you. I mean, it really is something that is going to take an extraordinary effort from a lot of people and a lot of time, and it may not work. And that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I always kind of gauge my experience on behind the scenes, how you're actually being treated. From the moment I started this project and I met with John, who I now call Uncle John, and I was introduced to Mark, immediately I felt like, okay, this is family, right? And so really being able to be treated with that respect, to have your decisions really at the forefront as well, is really critical. So thank you all for that.
Can I say one more thing about that?
Yeah.
And I think it's very important you asked me that question, because it's important to understand that Mark knows and appreciates this is really hard. And he's not some megalomaniac who thinks, like there's some people, I won't name who they are in the world, who think, everyone knows who I'm talking about, who think that, 100% they're going to succeed, and they think they know all the answers, and they think they have all the solutions, and some of them do great things, but I think, sustained transformative effect over a lifetime comes from people like Mark, not people like that, because he has an open mind, and he asks questions. I mean, our 6 hours back and forth from the West Coast was full of my challenging him and saying, among other things, a little bit out of my expertise, how do you make a city that's not going to just turn out to be, a town of trams that feels like Disney World because it's so overly planned? So he's been thinking about that, and anything that you raise and that the team, I'm sure this is your experience too, he's concerned about the challenges and the worries, but he's prepared to meet them, not with, not with overweening pride, but with an open mind.
And one thing about Mark is that you'll never make up an answer if you don't know the answer. You'll say, oh, interesting point, let me think about it. And you'll think about it, and you will come up with a solution with the right people. On that note, thank you, Preet, for all of that context. 2/3 of you did ask, to no one's surprise, how can the group listening at home, those of you in person, actually get involved in the building of the city of Telosa? And John Mallon here, our lead for Telosa, is going to fill you in on what you can do.
Well, thank you, Nora. The question of how to get involved is important and appreciated. Everyone will receive an email after this event that registered, and in that email you will see a survey that would ask you to take a few minutes to complete. In the email you will also be able to access our Telosa Community Network hosted by Mighty Networks, and there you'll be able to participate on live videos to share ideas. You'll also be able to engage socially as we build the community, and you'll also learn about best practices around the world that we can bring to Telosa and share with existing cities. So together we can co-design Telosa, and everyone can play a very important role. I'd also like to thank everyone here and online, our community, for joining us. I'd like to thank our very passionate team and hardworking team and all of our partners, and really can't thank everyone enough as we take these first exciting steps of a long journey together. So thank you.
And thank you, John. And thank you to our amazing panelists. Yes, round of applause for John and the team. Alana, Preet, Netta, and Mark. You're already applauding, but I do have our collective Oscars speech to give, so a bunch of other people to thank. Of course, BIG, our leading architecture firm. Burrow Happold, which is a premier sustainable engineering company. Aventus Outdoors for supporting our communication strategy and organizing this event. Polko, yet again, a leading community engagement firm. We also want to mention a few team members who aren't on the stage with us tonight. Vinit Barara, Preet's brother. He's an executive and board member of the Telosa Community Foundation. John, of course, he is the Telosa project lead and CEO of the Telosa Community Foundation. Bob Clark, who is a senior advisor to Telosa and a Telosa Junto member, and the rest of the incredible Junto. Oh my gosh, it's musicking me off. We made a joke about this earlier. I didn't think you actually would. Thanks. Most importantly, thank you to the wider community, everyone here, and those of you tuning in. And for those of you who are here, you get to drink cocktails with us now. So the reception is downstairs. Please stick around. We'll all be mixing and mingling, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone.